and welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the lovely and gracious Kirsha Fox, who is the author of The Son of Deception and the newly released The White Leaf Child. She is a homeschooling mom of four, avid gamer and reader.
And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach. She is a horror and fantasy author who loves to sprinkle magic on everything. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
And we're very excited to welcome our guest tonight, Bruce Nesmith. So Kirsha's going to tell you all about it.
Yes. Bruce was the lead designer of the Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim, as well as working on Fallout 3 and 4 and most of the other Elder Scrolls titles. Prior to that, he worked at TSR, writing Dungeons & Dragons supplements and adventures. We're very excited to meet him.
Yeah. Welcome to the show. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you.
Quite an impressive resume there. I'm not a huge gamer myself. I do enjoy it every now and then, but even I know Skyrim. So tell us a little bit about what got you started in writing and what your journey has looked like so far.
Well, my journey, it's been quite a journey. At this point, I'm retired, so we've got some 40 plus years of journey we can discuss. I started right out of college at TSR, so I kind of almost immediately when I entered the workforce started on the process of writing stories in a fantasy setting. Admittedly, they were for a gaming audience as opposed to for a novels audience, but the distance between those two, it's pretty thin. There's not a lot of room between one and the other. You're still trying to tell stories. You're still trying to entertain. And a lot of the things you learn doing one are highly translatable to another. And as you work in that media, I transited from paper and pencil role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons and whatnot, into video games. You're continuing to tell stories. It's just a different media that you're doing it in. And all along the way, I've been an avid reader. My book collection drives my wife nuts sometimes, but I have a lot of books. I've read quite a few of them, and it was inevitable that I would want to write my own. It was just a matter of when would I have the opportunity, both in terms of time and financial stability and having a cool idea and having the experience and wherewithal to actually be able to string together two coherent sentences.
Right. So what made you choose fantasy and then later choose contemporary?
Well, I was drawn to urban fantasy when that genre was in its early days. After having read more traditional fantasy, medieval era fantasy for, I don't know, decades.
Right.
Contemporary fantasy was kind of like a breath of fresh air. And so at the time, I started mulling around some ideas about what might make a good urban fantasy. And then as I sat around doing my workaday job, making video games, the nature of the genre actually shifted from what is now called contemporary fantasy into a genre that has more to do with female protagonists and love interests, and sort of has one strong foot in a romance with a contemporary fantasy background to it. Okay. So that kind of birthed the contemporary fantasy genre, which is what I write in, which is what the old urban fantasy used to be, which is just fantasy, but in a modern day setting where you're dealing with cities and technology and people in the world as we know it. In terms of my books, I've always been fascinated with mythology. I mean, even as far back as elementary school, I loved reading all the myths. A lot of kids do. But it didn't go away for me. And it informed a lot of the stuff that I worked on in the gaming industry. And in particular, I've always gravitated towards the Norse mythology. And so I decided to do something that was an alternate take on Norse mythology set in the modern world where Loki is hiding out as a stage magician in the suburbs of Chicago.
Oh, yeah, that sounds absolutely fascinating. I love mythology as well, and I looked a little into Norse mythology. The hard part for me was that the names are such, because they're from a different language, right? So the names would be
Oh
like,
yeah.
what is that again? Because, like, obviously Mjolnir, everyone knows, but like some of the other mythology that I was reading about, I would just be like, oh, I forget who that is because it was hard for me to recognize the names of people and things.
I
And
actually put an appendix in the book that had the major characters of traditional Norse mythology,
oh
so
yeah,
people could use it as a reference. Because
right. No,
I
that's
got
very
that
helpful.
comment as well as I don't know who all these people are.
Right. It's not one of the it's getting more and more well known, but yeah,
Well,
the
the
names.
big half dozen everybody knows. Everybody knows
Yeah.
Odin and Loki and Thor.
Right.
You start getting a little downstream from that, and Uller is one of my major characters, and nobody's heard of Uller unless you've actually read more
Right.
of the Norse
Right.
mythology.
Even more so than being able to pronounce the names is understanding the relationship between
Right.
the characters, because it's a pretty tangled web of who did what to who at what one time.
Right.
It is.
Right.
I have. Don't ask me to pronounce some of the characters. I take
Right.
faith that they're spelled correctly in the story.
Right. Yeah.
But one of the things that appealed to me was that tangled web. The Norse myths were never really written down. They were totally an oral tradition. They were written down at a much later date by Snorri Sturluson, a Christian academic, centuries later. And the people telling the stories didn't pay a lot of attention to putting them into a chronological order. So you actually cannot put the stories in a true chronological order. You can only kind of sort of put them in there. There's things that happen out of time and out of place. And they also treated their gods more like we treated American tall tale figures like Paul Bunyan and Pecos Bill. While they did also serve as the traditional godlike figures that explained the universe and nature, just as often they did silly, stupid things like Thor having to dress up as a woman in order to get his hammer back and go to a fake wedding. I mean, that's not typical mythology stuff. You don't see that in any other mythology, really. The Norse kind of had an interesting way of treating them as almost in a human way, which really made it easy to see it in terms of a modern day fantasy story. They already had aspects of humanity in them, and it was a very short step to make a story.
I do love the setting fantasy world in our everyday world too, because it's kind of like that magic behind the scenes that happens with contemporary fantasy.
All right. So, can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? How you get from idea to finished book?
Well, the ideas, I mean, they hit me whenever and wherever. Because of my long career in gaming, ideas are not the hard part for me. It's pinning them down and making it into an organized, I'll call it an organized mess, something that would actually be cohesive and understandable. But I'm very used to spinning off ideas. That's my entire career has been doing that. So once that's done, then I start to make an outline. The outline is usually fairly rough. It is not a complete absolute, this is what's in every single chapter outline. It's a little rougher than that. And then once I have the characters laid out, the themes that I want, the plot outline that I'm looking for, then I start writing. And I usually start at the beginning and go all the way to the end. And my background is a mathematician. Makes me put together a spreadsheet to track my progress. So I know how many words a week I'm supposed to do, and I track it and make sure that I'm on target and find a way to keep myself going.
Very interesting.
I think that is the most concise explanation we've ever heard from an author about their process. You've got this down to a a science there.
Yeah.
As much
Very
as writing
impressive.
can be a science.
Right. In your opinion, what do you think is the most important part of writing?
Ah, I have a couple notes here on that, so let me refresh my own memory on those things and put on the
Right.
glasses, but otherwise just make a reflection on your screen there. Um, a lot of it depends upon your goal. When
Right.
you just say what's important about writing, writing is not something that is just writing. It just doesn't occur that. You have to have a reason you're writing. Are you doing it to make money? Are you doing it to become famous or win awards? Is it for personal satisfaction? And these are all valid goals, but each one of them means there's something different about what's important. If you're in it to make money, then you need to know the market and you need to write a lot and you need to write it quickly because that's the secret to making a lot of money. Quality may or may not suffer, depends upon you as a writer and what you are and are not able to accomplish. If you're looking to win awards and be seen as one of the best writers, you aren't going to produce nearly as many products. But you have to understand your craft to a really high level. You have to understand how characters work and how to make them, the actual ins and outs of the English language or whatever your language you're writing in, things like that. If it's just for yourself that you have these ideas and you have to tell them or they're just going to burst out of you, just finishing is the most important part of writing. You've got to do that in order to get that story out there. You've got to make that completion. And across all of these, which is probably what you were actually asking, um, you need to have things that are memorable. If you look back at the stories that are your favorites, they have memorable characters, memorable scenes, memorable ideas that are in them. Something that you want to run out and tell your friends or coworkers about. Oh, I read this book and I had this cool, whatever it is, character, idea, plot, whatever it may happen to be. And that's what is going to drive through all of those, in my opinion, to make whatever level of success you're able to attain from it.
I really love that answer because it does address that everyone's goal is different, and so different things are going to be what you focus on. But yeah, there's something so great about our favorite stories that it's like that character that resonated with us, or the idea of the plot that was so unique and interesting that really like stuck with us. So I love that answer.
It's funny that there's like kind of two types of books. There's the one that you read, you enjoy, but like a week later you can't really remember very much about it. You're like, I know I read that, I can't remember anything about it, sorry. Like it's gone. And then there's the books you read and they change you, they resonate, you love them, you know, like they stick with you.
I was very young at the time, but I remember reading Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Oh, I love
Very
that
short
one.
little book,
Yes.
and the lessons that it imparts. Now, as adults, we could all probably say, yeah, they're kind of trite and rather obvious. They weren't so trite and obvious to me when I read it, and it did. It made a huge impression. So you're completely correct. You have those books that hit you at the right time to be life-changing or to present you a new way of thinking or seeing the world or seeing people. And those are the most memorable books. Those are the ones that you carry with you.
Yeah, love those stories. Yeah.
All right. So, do you prefer plot-based stories or like more character-driven stories?
I probably am more of a plot person. I'm probably a victim of my work history. When you look at gaming, plot trumps character by quite a bit. Not to say that there aren't some amazing characters in gaming.
Yeah.
But in a game, whether it's a tabletop game or whether it's a video game, the player is the main character and not a construct of the author. So you don't really have a character, you have reflections of the character. The player sees himself reflected in how the other NPC characters around him interact with him. That's the lens through which he sees himself and his internal monologue. That's how he perceives himself. So as a gamer, I tend to focus more on plot one of the things I'm working very hard on is to try to turn that corner and spend as much time on character. I think they're
Right.
both critically important. And that's the area I want to make dramatic improvements in, is to try and have better characters.
Yeah, we were just talking about this Monday, where if you know kind of what you are not as strong in, that's actually a strength in itself, because then you know how to work with solutions to troubleshooting that issue that you have. So I really love that you like recognize and know like where you want to improve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because like plot stories are great. For me, it's the characters I fall in love with as a reader that I'm like, I don't really care as much about the plot as long as I love the character. But when you have a wonderful plot and wonderful characters and they meet, it's kind of like that's where the magic is for me.
That is where the magic is. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what do you think is something that maybe some or a lot of authors might neglect when it comes to writing?
Well, let me refer to my notes again here. For me, making the story and the characters feel organic. I think one of the rookie mistakes that you can make as a writer is you've got this scene in your head that you're trying to drive your characters to, and you're so focused on getting them to there, you don't make it feel like it's a natural thing for them to have arrived. That results in characters doing stupid things. I hate it when my characters do stupid things. I try not to have them. Okay, why did you go in the basement? You know the monster's in the basement. Come on, why did you do that? That was stupid.
Right.
And the moments when I get stuck tend to be when I am driving towards something,
Right.
and all I can see is that I'm forcing it. And so one of two things has to happen. Either I need to change what I'm driving towards, and you cannot be afraid to change that.
Right.
You have to accept that that may need to change. Or I have to back up a ways in the maybe material I've already written and change the path that got them to the moment that starts to feel awkward, to make it feel like it's more organic, to put them in that place or have them have the thoughts that they are having. And the other one actually is a riff on the title of your program here, which is telling instead of showing. I think that is something that every author probably works on a hourly basis, is not just telling it because it's already done in your head,
Right.
but to show it and let it reveal itself to the reader. Because all we don't want to do is we want to say, oh, it's already in my hand, I'm just going to put it down there. No, that doesn't work. You have to let it unfold to the reader the way that it's unfolding in your own head. So you have to show instead of tell.
Yeah, that's the art of storytelling for sure, I think.
So who is your favorite author and what do you feel that person does best?
Well, if I go old school, because I'm an old guy, Roger Zelazny is probably one of my favorites. His stories largely stand the test of time. They might be a little simplistic for this day and age, but they are still wonderful examples of presenting completely new things, especially for the time. They may not feel quite as fresh because people have taken his ideas and built new stories off of those concepts. But his stuff always felt so imaginative to me. I talked about fresh ideas earlier. He had so many wonderful, fresh ideas. In terms of the current set of authors, I'm very drawn to Adrian Tchaikovsky for the exact same reason. He has some really cool, compelling ideas that come out. And I always read his stuff and it's like, wow, I didn't think of that and I should have. As an author, that's like, yeah, okay. Yeah, he got me on that one. He's better than I am, and I have to just confess my sins.
Oh, I love that viewpoint. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have a question for you. You said ideas are never hard for you. Where do you think those ideas come from? Like, where do you find your inspiration and things?
I think there's really two paths to that. One is exposure. You have to read a lot, you have to see a lot, you have to experience a lot. Um, if you don't have this exposure to a lot of things, whether it's in culture, whether it's in science, whether it's in fiction, whatever it needs to be, you need to have that exposure so that you have things you can pluck at in order to go ahead and make those ideas. I think the other thing is practice. There's this mystique, particularly in American culture, that creativity is not something that can be trained. And I think that's wrong. Not to say that certain people don't take to it easier or better than others, but if you are forced into an environment where you constantly are having to come up with new ideas, you see how other people come up with new ideas, and you just keep doing it over and over, you learn how to put things together. You learn how to look at things sort of sideways from the way other people do. And that's something that my gaming career really has helped me with, is
Right.
because every time we'd have a problem, one of the first things that we would do is say, well, let's not look at it head on. What if we fill in the blank? And you sort of turn the problem sideways and see if that gives you any uh, new insights into it. So, there's tools for doing things like that. And I think it's something everybody can do with practice and with exposure.
Right, right. I think it was Lou L'Amour that talked about writing as like turning on the faucet, and getting the ideas and the words flowing. So I struggle a little bit sometimes with ideas, but I think you had the benefit definitely of soundboarding, of being able to bounce ideas off another person, which I think is really helpful for other authors as well.
Yeah.
I know Kirsha and I do that sometimes where we're just like, she's like, this is what's going on, and just talking aloud about it kind of gets the gears going to think about how to fix it.
It does. It does. When you have to explain your idea to somebody else, it crystallizes things for you, and it crystallizes both the good and the bad. The things that are there that are good, it's like, oh, wow, I see it now. And the things are bad, it's like, I can't even say these words out loud. I know as soon as they're going to come out of my mouth, it's
you're going to regret it. Yeah, you're going to regret it. Oh, yeah.
Yes, it helps solidify the idea even to yourself. It becomes
Yep.
not abstract anymore.
Right. And I feel like a lot of people, more than they realize, are auditory processors anyways. Like we talk about when you have a problem going on, you don't even realize what's bothering you until you're talking to someone about what's been going on with your life, and then you're like, okay, now I can articulate, like now I can pinpoint what
you
the
found
issues
it.
are.
All right. So our show kind of is aimed towards newer writers. If you could tell a new writer one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, there's so many things I would tell
There are
them.
so many things.
I wrote a couple things down here. Oh, yes. This is probably my number one thing. The odds are, as a writer, you are not going to get famous or rich.
Right.
Accept that. I am likely never going to become famous or rich from my writing. It's just not what's going to happen. There's too many other authors out there competing for those eyeballs and those dollars. So enjoy what you are doing. If you're not writing something you enjoy writing, if you're not enjoying the writing process itself, you need to address that. So, make sure that you have the joy in creating the product that you're creating. Because the other thing is, writing is a fairly lonely endeavor. It's you and your thoughts, and they're coming out through your fingers. For these days, most of us through keyboards, but there's probably still a few Philistines out there who do it by pen and pencil. And there isn't anybody else there. I mean, we talked a minute ago about bouncing ideas off of each other, but that's 2% of the process.
Right.
98% of the process is just you and your ideas and expressing them in a written form. And if you're not okay with that, you need to take a hard look at it. So make sure what you're writing is something that you enjoy. And when you enjoy it, that means you need to be doing it, and you just need to finish. You need to find a way to finish. And you do it for yourself first. Because once again, it's that joy. If you're not doing it for yourself, it ain't going to happen. And if you're loving it, you will finish it. If you're just
Right.
doing it to satisfy some outside goal, you probably aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yes, I tell people, make sure that you're writing a book you enjoy reading, because you are going to read it so many times.
Right.
Yes.
Over and over
You're
again.
going to read this book over and over and over. So make sure it's a book you enjoy.
And you're going to see all the flaws.
Right. Yeah.
Every little flaw in the
Right.
logic of the book, in the characters, you're going to notice.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I think it's so important to practice finishing, especially as a new author, but at any stage of the writing journey, finishing teaches you so much, whether it shows you what you did wrong or it shows you what you did right. Finishing is very important. So I always encourage people, because novels are a very different thing from short stories. But if someone asks for advice and they're just like, I can't finish a novel, it's like practice finishing with short stories and see what you learn. For
And
sure.
there's two aspects to finishing. There's getting all the words down,
Yeah.
and then there's stopping fixing it.
Yes.
And those are equally difficult.
Yes.
I mean, just getting all the words down, that is a challenge. My hat is off to anyone who gets all the words down.
Mhm.
But then you can fall into the trap of it's never quite done because I'm continually editing it. I'm continually trying to
Right.
polish it and fix it. At some point, you have to stop, set it aside, and say,
Yeah.
this is done. Yeah, it ain't
Yeah.
perfect, but it's done.
Right. When is that one brush stroke too many on the canvas? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I agree. That is very hard, to take your hands off the keyboard and be like, I'm going to submit this now. Like,
Yep.
Yeah, it is what it is at this point. And
Yep.
knowing
read
that
it
is
one more
very
time.
right. Knowing that can be very tricky. So you've got to do the writing process for games, video games, and novels. What have you learned from the writing process, or finishing that novel as opposed to writing for games?
Well, one thing that you don't do a lot of in gaming is a lot of narration. I got a tremendous amount of practice writing dialogue.
Yeah.
I think my dialogue skills are actually pretty good, but you don't write a lot of narration because you're counting on the players to do the actions themselves. And narration is whatever the player is doing, and it doesn't get expressed through writing, it gets expressed through action. So narration is something that I definitely improved quite a bit on early on. I had a few other notes on this topic. Let me see what I wrote to myself here. Oh, yes, I mentioned this earlier, actually. Focusing more on character, because one of the tendencies of people with my background is to focus strictly on plot, and character really needs to be an equal partner to plot. And indie publishing is hard.
Yeah.
There's so much noise, it's so competitive. The focus is on serialization rather than standalone books, and not all of us have a trilogy in our heads. God forbid I have to write something more than a trilogy. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to.
Right.
We'll have to see. But the whole indie world the indie publishing world is just, it's an eye opener for anyone who has not already traversed it.
Right.
Absolutely, on every point that you just said. Indie publishing is fraught with so many traps, so many mistakes that you can fall into, and there's not a whole lot of guidance.
Yep.
And all the guidance you get is a little bit suspect sometimes.
Right. Or
there's a lot of sharks in the water.
Yeah.
A lot of sharks in the water.
Right. And unfortunately, I find that true of the publishing industry in general, just that it's everyone's dream, right, to get published and have their book in their hands and all that. And unfortunately, when there's so many people with that dream, there's also going to be sharks, like you said, who are going to prey upon people who have that dream and are willing to make it come true. And so, yeah, it can be hard to navigate when you are new to it and figuring out, like, who can I trust? Yeah.
Well, and it's your heart that you're laying on the table.
Right.
I mean, this isn't, I made a box and I'm trying to sell it. This is something that comes from your heart and from your soul. It's the result of a creative endeavor, and you feel personally invested in it. And that makes you vulnerable because you're not thinking as clearly when something that you care about that deeply is there. You're willing to trust when maybe you shouldn't in a lot of cases, and you get bitten.
One bit of advice that we like to give new authors is to grow their community, their trusted community. Find your people, get your street team together, get your trusted people together.
Yes.
We help each other, the indie community.
Yes, the writing community can be very fabulous, for sure. So finding other authors to be friends with and can kind of like say like, oh, that doesn't sound like the best idea, can be very helpful. Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned you're retired. How much time do you devote to writing right now? Like, how do you make time for writing?
I'm a lazy bastard. I usually get up in the morning, have a nice leisurely breakfast with my wife, sit and read the paper, do a couple word puzzles together. Then I come down to the computer and play a couple games because that's just who I am now. And then for the latter half of the morning, I write, and I write for the early half of the afternoon. And usually I'm done about then. And that gives me, by the end of the week, usually around 8,000 words.
Oh, very nice.
So that's the discipline I have. One of the really, really nice things about both the industries, but particularly the video game industry that I was in, is I learned that discipline. And God knows I didn't get it from home. And I barely got it from when I was in college. And if you saw my freshman year grades, you'd know why. But I learned that discipline on those jobs. I learned the discipline at TSR of meeting weekly and even daily writing goals, just getting something on the paper. I learned the discipline of constantly revising your work at Bethesda Softworks. And so for me, the discipline comes easy now, but it's the fruit of, a couple decades worth of having that discipline being enforced with the jobs that I did.
Congratulations on retirement, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're able to enjoy things a little bit more and have those leisurely breakfasts with your wife. It's hard to develop a habit, right? You have to do something, they say, for the average person for 21 days or something, almost a month before it really feels like a habit. And for some people, habits feel like they never happen. So it's definitely a lot of practice of being disciplined, like you said, and sitting down and putting in the time towards your writing.
Yep.
For sure.
I definitely could not have done it when I was 21. I would have failed miserably. Miserably. Self-discipline did not exist.
Right. And so often in youth, like it really shouldn't. I feel like for a lot of youth, like we should be
maybe a little bit.
Yeah. So some things you should have a little responsibility for, but we should have that freedom as a youth. I really am working myself on personal goals of dedicating the time and making writing a priority again, because work gets in the way, life gets in the way, and then you're suddenly like, oh, I haven't written since I was on vacation. Like,
my first book was written while I was still employed. I retired pretty much at the same time as it got published, and it took 2 years to write it. And there was an 8-month period in there where I wrote not a single word. Real life is hard. Real life gets in the way, and real life is more important. It just is.
Right.
So you got to attend to it.
Yeah.
I have 4 small kids. Writing happens when it can happen.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it is my goal to try to write every day, and I steal bits of time here and there. So, but I think as long as you just keep writing and don't give up, you'll make it.
Yep.
Very true. Now, do you have a favorite part of writing?
A favorite part of writing. Let's see. What
Mm-hmm.
did I make as my notes for that? Oh, yes. I should have remembered this. Um, it's the same thing that I did when I was doing gaming, and that is creating new worlds within which to set my characters and my stories.
Oh.
It's something I've had a tremendous amount of practice with. I feel good about it, like I know what I'm doing with that. It's I think I build very believable, coherent, and I build worlds that fit together and make sense.
Mhm.
And it's a very pleasurable thing to do. And building that world is background for the writing. Strangely enough,
Right.
the actual writing will end up changing things about the world that you create and set your stories in. But the world is not the writing. They are two
Yeah.
separate things.
Do you have any tips for how to write worlds that do come together really well, or?
Um, I could probably do an entire hour on that.
Yes, I'm sure you could.
Really good. Yes.
So, one of the things that I would say, particularly for writing, but this applied to gaming as well,
Mhm.
is don't get too caught up in your backstory. Um, I remember one of my first days on the job at Bethesda. I was told to come up with this grand story for Thieves Guild for Oblivion, Elder Scrolls 4. And so I built this big backstory, and then I had the actual things the character is going to do. And so my boss, Todd Howard, I sat down and told him the entire backstory. And just as I was getting ready to tell him what the character is going to do, he said, "That sounds great. That is the story you should make."
Mhm.
And I cannot tell you how often people who are not used to building worlds make that mistake. They have this really engaging, fantastical backstory for how things came to be. And it's more exciting and interesting than the actual events that are going to happen to the characters that they have.
Right. Right.
Um,
Mhm.
not to pick on Tolkien, but many things in the Silmarillion are more exciting than what happened in the actual
Right.
trilogy. Not all. Tolkien actually did an excellent job with what he wrote.
Mhm.
But sometimes you need to focus on what's going to happen now and not get caught up in explaining the why in the background. Let that come a little
Right.
bit more organically. Be willing to adjust things in the world to fit the needs that you have for the story. The
Mhm.
world shouldn't drive the story should drive the world. And even though world making is one of my specialized skills and something that is foundational to a lot of my gaming career, I still believe in that. The world serves the story and not the other way around.
Absolutely. Um,
Thank
yeah,
you.
I would agree with that because it's like an iceberg. Everyone always makes that analogy of you have the 90% that the author knows that helps them write the 10% that goes in the book.
Mhm.
The trick is to try and flip that script. Try and only
Okay.
have 10% author notes, because
Oh,
otherwise you're wasting 90% of your writing.
right.
Which is how the Silmarillion got published. He did his 90% of the background, so they published it.
Right.
But
I think,
you need to have some of that submerged stuff. I
yeah.
think one of the coolest things about stories is when, as a reader, I can see things connect, but I don't know how or why. But I know that they do
Mhm.
because the author knows how they do, and even though he
Right.
doesn't say it, it sort of blends into what he's doing. And this
Right.
is the beauty of some of the stuff from the Silmarillion. It informed how Tolkien wrote his
Yeah.
trilogy. But
Mhm.
if you spend your time writing that 90% of the iceberg that's underwater and the story is the 10%,
Mhm.
you've got the wrong ratio there. You're doing too much time in the background. You need to try and get way more in the story and have enough of that hidden submerged iceberg to support everything to be its foundation
Yeah.
without spending needless time creating things that really don't matter.
Mhm.
Right. I think that for someone, if they want to focus on characters, a great thing to know is the character's motivations. So rather than spending the time thinking of their whole backstory of their entire life,
Oh
just
yeah.
what are their motivations and how does that drive them to make the decisions they do, is a good compromise of getting the backstory and the blending going without overpowering it with, well, when they were 3, this happened to them, and that's why they're the way they are, you know?
Yes.
I like to think of it as have one big secret, this plot-wise, let's say.
Right.
I'll continue to pick on the Tolkien trilogy because it's easy.
Yeah.
So Tom Bombadil, everyone's favorite.
Right.
Who the hell is he? What is he? What is he? All this.
Right.
That's your one big secret for the Tolkien trilogy. What is this guy? And never reveal it.
Right.
Never reveal it. That's the secret that you keep. And I think many times, maybe not all the time, you could say that about characters too. They have something that you know that the reader does not, but it's going to come out in how you write them.
Right.
And your reader may end up guessing it, and so what? Who cares? But it's back there. It informs things. It allows the reader to explore the character and try to get that peek behind the curtain, which I think readers love doing.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trap for some authors I know who are typically dungeon masters. They'll write their whole campaign setting.
I've been a dungeon master. I know what you're talking about.
And after they're done, they actually have no interest in writing the story itself that is supposed to be.
Right.
I wrote this wonderful background for the Thieves Guild for Oblivion.
Right. And then you were done. Yeah.
And then my boss told me, that sounds great. That's what you're going to make. Forget all this story stuff that you were going to do. That's more exciting. Yeah. No, you're right. They make this amazing background, and there's no way for the players to find out about it either. Frequently, this is unknowable information. It's buried deep enough that it never comes out, and then it's not relevant at that point. So
or it becomes too orchestrated.
Yeah, you need to make sure you're deep enough without going too deep. We talk a lot about suspension of disbelief in video game stories. You need to explain things just deep enough to cause suspension of disbelief to occur.
Right.
You go any deeper than that, you're really not serving yourself or your audience.
What is your least favorite part of writing?
It's got to be the editing. Having to conform to rigid grammar rules. Grammar is important. You can't just make up your own stuff. But sometimes, since I'm not a natural born grammarian, I look at these grammar rules and I'm like, when I do what you tell me to, it makes it seem bland and boring. So trying to bridge that gap of conforming to the rules of grammar, which are important, I don't want to undersell that, while knowing how to stretch them or break them a little bit to make your writing more engaging. I think that's probably the number one for me. The other thing that always kind of chafes at me, and this really isn't something I hate, but it's tightly related, is something I just said myself that you should do, which is the just write something. It's necessary, but the question wasn't, did I think it was important? It was, what do I hate? I hate
Right.
So yes, it is necessary, but I hate it because when you're writing and you're at that stage where you're just trying to put words down because you need to push yourself forward, what you're writing is crap. You're going to delete it, and that's no fun. It's no fun at all. It's important. It's necessary to get through it, but it is not fun.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
Yes. I think we mourn those pages and paragraphs that we move into the graveyard.
Yeah.
I actually keep a separate document where I take snippets of things that I've written that if I have to cut them out, I'll drop them over there. Thinking,
I never delete anything. Yeah.
And about 50% of them I actually do end up finding a home for later, or they make me think about things to write. The other 50%, they're just there on the trash heap forever.
Right. Yeah, I have a doc that's like leftovers that it's like, oh, I could possibly use this in something else, and then I have the graveyard where it's just like no one needs to see this
Yeah.
ever again.
Yeah.
So, um, so we talked about writing advice that you hate, which is the just right because it's the easiest and hardest bit of writing. Do you have writing advice that you like?
Um, I'm a big fan of Neil Gaiman's phrase or saying, when somebody, a reader, tells you something is wrong with your story, they're almost always correct. But when they tell you how to fix it, they're almost always wrong. And there's two things about that come forward. One is the obvious thing, and that's the right and the wrong part. People are very perceptive. They know when something isn't right, and they can say so, but they can't always quantify it. And part of the job of the author is to find new and creative ways to solve problems or to solve a problem in a way that fits with the greater work. And your reader isn't necessarily going to have that skill. So they'll see the problem. You need to find your own way to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part of that a lot of people gloss over is the word almost, which appears twice. They're almost always right. That does not mean they're always right. And they almost are always wrong about how to fix it. That does not mean they're always wrong. And that means you need to keep a bit of an open mind because they may be onto something. Good ideas come from all kinds of places. And just because a reader said it doesn't make it wrong. And just because a reader said it doesn't make it right. You have to look at it with your open mind and make sure that they're onto something. But just be aware, usually they're right about what's wrong, and usually you should ignore how they say to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes, we are very fond of that bit of advice. That
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
do that one a lot. For me, I try to keep in mind about who the advice is coming from. Is the person talking from a point that is their strength? Are they already really good at this and they are somewhat of an authority to talk to you about that? Or do they know absolutely so very little, but they think that they're an expert
Right.
just by virtue of that they thought
Yeah.
it?
Right. Right.
So, yeah, get your trusted team together, people that you whose advice you trust for sure. But you're right; it always has to come from you.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I mean, you're doing this because you love it, hopefully. So that's part of the process. You got to fix
Right.
stuff.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think it's good to say like, is this something that everyone finds off, or is this something that's like personal to the other person too, as well? When you're getting advice
Yeah.
from like, oh, this doesn't make sense in your story. As an editor, I tell everyone just like sit with the advice for a couple of days. And it can always be a
Yeah.
conversation, right? So if I say as an editor, like, oh, maybe you should do this with your story, and you come back to me and say, like, well, this is the reason why I did it, so I really feel strongly it should stay that way. Then, like, absolutely, it's your story. At the end of the day, do what you think is right for your story, because editors can get things
Yeah.
wrong because they don't know every reason behind what you're doing. So
Yeah. There's two really bad things you can do with an editor. One
Mhm.
is ignore too much of their advice. And
right,
the other is do absolutely 100% of everything they tell you to do.
right,
Mhm.
You know, I like to be in the 90 to 95% the editor's right range.
right,
But there's a few things that they'll say to do, and it's like, I just can't. That's just not the story I'm trying to tell. But
right.
you got to listen to them way more than you don't.
Right. But yeah, I just tell everyone like sit with the advice, think about it for a while because your first reaction is often not your final reaction. So
Mhm.
that's great advice. What influences your writing?
Mostly the reading that I've done.
Yeah.
I've been reading fantasy and science fiction since the 70s.
Mhm.
And I've read a lot of it, a huge amount of it. I've read probably 95+% of all the Hugo and Nebula Award winners. Not that those are necessarily always the best books, but they're definitely usually good books. Every major author out there, I've read something of theirs. I also get inspiration from movies and TV shows, although frequently those are derivative of the books that I've already read. And the games and gaming products. But number one is absolutely the stuff I've read. That is what influences it the most.
All right.
I find that true of a lot of authors, that we are readers first, and that
Oh.
shows, in our writing.
Do you ever struggle with writer's block? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Very rarely. I'll chalk that up to the discipline of working in the gaming environment and having to professionally be creative 40 hours a week. So it doesn't happen very often for me, but it does happen occasionally. It definitely happened in my first book. I got to a point where I didn't know how to connect where I was to where I needed to go. One of the things I'm always sure of for every book I write is I know how it's going to end. You don't know how your book's going to end before you write down the first word. You don't know where you're driving to. That's my personal philosophy. And I didn't know how I was going to connect those dots. So I skipped over. I went to where I did know what was going to happen, and I wrote from there to the end of the book. And then I came back, and I still struggled a bit, but by then it had sort of sat in the back of my brain long enough that I had ideas on how to connect the pieces and was able to write the interstitial piece for that.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's just kind of, you can skip and move forward. I use the brackets method, where I put brackets and say, like, do this, and then skip ahead to the next chapter if I need to.
Yes. I sometimes write out of order. If there's a scene that's clear in my head, go write that scene now while it's in your head, and you can fit it in like a puzzle piece where it's supposed to be later on. Just put the scenes together.
That is one of the benefits of plotting, is that you can kind of slot things in, because you're like, I know this chapter is going to happen, so I can fit it in
sometime.
I can fit it in when it happens. So that is nice. What has been your most significant writing victory so far?
Oh, I'm gonna stick with the theme here. Just plain finishing my first book.
Yes.
I mean, it took 2 years. Admittedly, I was working at the time. But I was not sure that I could write a book at that point. I really wasn't. I mean, I had the idea, I had the outline, I felt relatively confident in that. Thanks to the career I've had, that part was the easy part. But the actual writing, I didn't know that if I could write a novel. That was a question mark. And as time dragged on, and I only had weekends and evenings, not all weekends and evenings. I mean, family still wanted to see me occasionally. I didn't know that I was going to finish it. And then I had the 8-month period where I literally didn't write a single word. So it was not a given. So that's the most significant accomplishment for me, because how many people out there can say they have successfully written a novel?
Very
10% of the people say they want to write one. 5%.
I think you're pretty close, because I think it's like 90-some% want to write a book, but only 6% actually finish the book that they want to write.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that a vast majority of those 90% that don't, they want what being an author achieves, not the actual process of writing. They want to be able to say they've written a book. They want the accolades of written a book. But the actual writing, that's the part you have to enjoy.
It can be most painful thing ever at some time. When you're sitting there and you're like 8 months into not having written a word, and you need to do it, and you're struggling. That can be a very hard thing to do. But kudos on accomplishing that. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Every book is a huge accomplishment, I think.
Once you've done your first one, they get easier. I mean,
really, because I found my second book was the hardest.
Interesting.
just because it's like the first one, the idea was fresh and new, and then I went to write the second one, and I was like, it has to be better than the first, and I just kind of struggled to, yeah,
pressure.
yeah.
I have a phrase that is something that people who worked with me have heard over and over and over again. It's called the game of expectations.
Yeah.
And it drives everything. You are not judged by what you do. You are judged by what is expected of you.
Right.
When my 2-year-old granddaughter gives me a painting, a picture that she made with crayon drawings, and it's just a bunch of scribbled lines, it's wonderful. If one of you gave me that, it'd be like, okay, are you off your meds?
Right.
And the drawing is the same, but the expectation is different. And so you set your expectations for yourself on your second book higher, which is a reasonable thing to do. But you are having difficulty in your mind achieving those expectations and managing expectations. And I hate saying that way because it's very marketing speak, but it's still the God's honest truth. Managing expectations is a really important thing to do.
Very sage advice. Thank you.
That's very good advice.
Yes. It's very true, though. That yes, expectations is a huge part of
I completely
pressure we put on ourselves. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So what are you reading now?
The book I'm currently reading is Book of the Night by Holly Black.
Okay.
I just finished R.F. Kuang's Babel.
Oh, I've heard good things about that.
Yeah, it is. It's a strangely technical book, but it is good. It's quite good. I also just finished Adrian Tchaikovsky's Dogs of War. It's a fun little read. And next up for me when I'm done with Book of Night is probably going to be Tamsin Muir's Nona the Ninth, the third, I believe, in that series.
All right.
Well, we've had an absolute blast talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been a
You're
pleasure.
welcome. I've enjoyed this quite a bit.
Yes, and thank you to everyone who's listening along at home. Before I jump into my spiel about our ending, I just remembered, where can we find you online and learn more about you and your book?
I do not have a web page. Hopefully I'll fix that at some point in the near future. But I do have a Facebook author page. You can find me there. I do have links to other podcasts or interviews I've done, and biographies, and links to the books I've written on Amazon. So that's probably the best place to get in touch with me. And I always reply to any messages sent to me on that page or through that page's messenger app.
All right.
Wonderful. Thank you again for joining us tonight. And thanks to
You
everyone.
are most welcome.
Yeah. Thanks to everyone listening at home. Remember, there's more than one way up a mountain, and you can catch our next episode next Friday. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, then you can find us on social media at The Tellnut Show, or email us at thetellnutshow@gmail.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach, and can be found at hijingsrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks, and see you next time.